Good morning, everyone, and happy Tuesday. Welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you all this morning. Kim, who do we have?
Friend of the show, Emily Jasinski, is joining us to weigh in on the media's coverage of Afghanistan, and Missouri Senate candidate and former Afghanistan veteran shares his perspective on the administration's withdrawal. And that brings us right where we'd like to start. So yesterday, President Biden addressed the nation in response to the Taliban's capture of Kabul and America's duty to the Afghan people. We put together a mashup of some of the highlights of that speech. Let's go ahead and watch.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. That's why we're still there. We were clear-eyed about the risks. We planned for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I would be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. I'm now the fourth American president to preside over war in Afghanistan. 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. I will not pass this responsibility on to a fifth president. I will not mislead the American people by claiming that just a little more time in Afghanistan will make all the difference. Nor will I shrink from my share of responsibility for where we are today and how we must move forward from here. I am President of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me. But if Afghanistan is unable to mount any real resistance to the Taliban now, there is no chance that 1 year, 1 more year, 5 more years, or 20 more years of U.S. military boots on the ground would have made any difference.
So the one thing about this speech that drove me the most crazy was, and we didn't play this part of the clip, but he mentioned why they didn't evacuate all of the people in advance. He was saying, well, people were criticizing us that we didn't do this in advance. And he says, well, it was because we were asked not to by the Afghan forces and the government, and they didn't want to cause any sort of panic or, the optics essentially of looking like, well, the Taliban are coming and I guess they're going to take over. And my big beef with that, and I have a real issue with that, is America chose, rather than doing the right thing by evacuating all of these people in advance and slowly, they decided they didn't want the optics of losing to the Taliban. I mean, that is unacceptable to me.
Well, right. And so in order for the United States to, to hand over power in an orderly fashion, they would have had to acknowledge, like you said, that they were handing over power to the Taliban. In other words, that they would have to surrender power to the Taliban. And there was nobody in Washington, nobody in the media, no policymakers who were willing to make that argument that what we need to do here is surrender. So they would rather maintain the fiction that this Afghan National Army and this Afghan government is going to be able to receive power that the United States hands to them and hold on long enough that the United States can slowly move its way out. But as Biden said, there is a contradiction there, because as soon as you start moving refugees out in significant fashion, as soon as you start moving weapons or military hardware out of the country, then that precipitates a collapse, because then you're suggesting that you don't have confidence in the government to stand up anymore. And a government that doesn't have anything other than U.S. confidence, when it loses that, it falls apart. So the only way they could have done this in an orderly fashion was to hand over power to the Taliban, and they were never going to do that.
Well, they should have done that.
I agree with you.
Well, and to be clear, what was lacking from the speech, he justified why we were leaving Afghanistan. We've gone over on this show multiple times that the polling suggests most Americans want to withdraw. What they didn't want is to withdraw in this haphazard, dangerous, reckless way that he did. The questions he needed to be answering yesterday were not answered, which is, why didn't you secure American citizens' exit before you let, the airport in Bagram fall? Why didn't you make sure U.S. diplomats were were taken out? Why didn't we spend the last 8 months of his presidency evacuating Afghan interpreters who supported U.S. forces? There was just seemingly no preparation in the lead up to this withdrawal. And to Kim's point, I do think it's because he didn't want the optics of surrender, but instead we ended up with far worse optics of,
Right, but the problem there on the polling is that if you ask the American people if they want to surrender to the Taliban, they probably are going to say no. And so, they're creating this fiction that, no, we're not surrendering to the Taliban. We've negotiated with them, and we're going to hand over power to the, Afghan government, and there will be some power sharing agreement sometime in the future, and the American people are fine with that. But I don't necessarily think there was a way for them to just say, you know what, we're surrendering. The politics of taking on the national security establishment, the war machine, are so intense. That he probably would have capitulated in the face of them if that's what he tried. I'm surprised and frankly impressed that Biden was able to to stand up to the war machine and say, you know what, we are withdrawing. The images that we saw over the weekend are basically the reason that we've been there for 20 years, because everybody in power over the last 20 years wanted to avoid that. Didn't want to make it so it never happened, but just wanted to kick the can down the road another week and another week and another week, so that happens on somebody else's watch. So frankly, I'd say, Kim, curious for your take on this, but good for Biden for being willing to be the one who did it on his watch. And as he said, there's not going to be a fifth United States president who oversees this war.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I definitely wanted out of this war, and I commend Biden for actually having the guts to take on this horrible situation, these optics. I mean, they knew the Taliban eventually were going to take Afghanistan. They just didn't think it would happen in a matter of days. And that's the beef I think that many of us are having watching this is it's not the withdrawal. We wanted that. Okay, most of us agree we wanted out of that war. But it's the fact that the people are hanging on to an airplane as it's flying away. That is unacceptable. That is unacceptable to us. He should resign. I mean, this is the biggest failure. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm very upset about this. I did a whole thing on my own show that I ranted for like 15 minutes on this, and I even cried about it. I mean, this is so horrible, the optics of this. They should have gotten those people out. And this is, I think, such a bungle that this would cause, in my mind, a U.S. president to have to resign from this, including Kamala, too. She admitted she was the last one standing in the room. So I guess we're going to have President Pelosi. My worst nightmare, but whatever. He needed to get out. That was good. The way they did it, though, they could have done it without totally handing power over to the Taliban. They should have just allowed the speculation by withdrawing everybody and saying, well, it looks like, the Americans are leaving and they're taking all of their the translators and the people who helped with them. So maybe they're anticipating that this is going to fall to the Taliban. And where the heck was the intelligence agency? I mean, what in the world?
Not only that, they missed. And Alyssa, I'm curious, since you've interacted with them, they missed all of these deals that were being brokered in the far outside of Kabul. You started to have deals between the Taliban and low-ranking officials. We know this now. Basically, where they were paying the Afghan military to hand over their weapons and to hand over their positions, and then basically they bought their way into Kabul, which. Good. That's better than shooting their way in and leaving a trail of blood on the way in. But how on earth does this get negotiated right under the noses of the U.S. intelligence complex?
I mean, this entire debacle marks probably the greatest breakdown in everything from the intelligence community to the Pentagon leadership to the White House decision making. And I'd have to push back on your point that Biden deserves credit for this. Does he deserve credit for turning over billions of dollars of weaponry to the Taliban that I can assure you will be used against Americans and our allies in the future? There was a way to do this that did not end this way. And it's if anything, it proves to the public what I think we've all kind of.
I don't know if our empire was capable of doing it any other way than the way we did it.
We could, but the way to do it, unfortunately, would have given that bad PR, that bad visibility of, wait, the Americans, they're removing their aircraft, they're removing their MRAPs, they're removing their Humvees from Afghanistan, and then they're evacuating their people. It would have signaled surrender, but it would have set up a safer...
It would also be like, wait, so we trained these folks for 20 years, and then the second we leave, we're taking all of our toys and weapons with us? Like, what?
Well,
that's kind of a betrayal.
I'm talking about U.S. weaponry that was housed by the U.S. military at Bagram, not that we've given to Afghan security forces. That's the distinction, because no, the Afghan security forces are armed to the teeth.
There was just all the optics were going to be bad, right? I mean, there was no good way to withdraw and lose a war. I mean, there's just, no matter what, however you slice it, it sucks. But
they didn't want to admit they were losing. Yeah.
Well, but but beyond that, I mean, look, we lost. Everybody knows that. We have to withdraw and get out of there. But there was a right thing to do, and that wasn't to leave these people behind. It's not about optics. It's about doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. Where did American morality go? We're supposed to be the world's heroes, right? This is what we've painted and what we've said to the world. And how would anybody trust us anymore after this? I mean, this was a catastrophe. The way we got out of there, there was no way was good, but this was the worst way. And the way that we take 800 days to process an application from an interpreter who worked with the United States military is pathetic, and it's shameful. Like, if you trusted them to work with the American military, then just stamp them and bring them in.
Well, and let's compare Joe Biden's remarks yesterday to comments from George W. Bush back in 2006.
The days of the Taliban are over. The future of Afghanistan belongs to the people of Afghanistan, and the future of Afghanistan belongs to freedom.
Where's that guy? Sorry. Cart him into Congress and sit him there for an Afghanistan commission.
Well, and I think we're going to end up seeing a lot of hearings around this. I think the generals need to speak. I think the IC needs to. I think decision makers within the National Security Council. The American people need answers. Why you have people dangling from a plane. You have 5,000 to 10,000 Americans still in country in Afghanistan and no actual strategy on how to evacuate them.
Former President Trump also backtracked on his remarks, simply saying, quote, "It's not that we left Afghanistan, it's the grossly incompetent way we left," unquote.
Like as if he would do any better.
Yeah, well, President Donald Trump is known for nothing other than his competence and his orderly ability to run the government. He would have thought this through. He would have seen every different angle that was coming, made sure that he paid attention to all of the different briefings that he was getting. So that every contingency was accounted for.
So I talked about this a little bit on CNN yesterday, because there was a rush by some of Trump world and the previous administration to say this wouldn't have happened under our watch. I disagree in the sense that he was pushing for full-scale withdrawal. The difference was, the difference at the time was we were saying it would be conditions-based. Now, the problem there is conditions-based is basically a catch-all to say we could be in Afghanistan another 10 to 20 years. So there was going to be a moment where the rubber would meet the road for some American president, and they would have to make a decision to leave. Biden did that. It was how he did it that is so inappropriate, that is going to be remembered terribly for decades to come.
And we'll tell you what's on our radars next.